She was supposed to be home by Sunday, June 18th, 2019. A summer morning, like many before it, settled over Yellowstone National Park. A mixture of distant birdsong and the gurgle of geothermal vents filled the air as tourists filed into the gates. Somewhere between the Lamar Valley and Soda Butte Creek, 17-year-old Alyssa Harkins was unloading her backpack from the rear of her stepfather's car. There was no ceremony, no final hug, just a quick wave, her standard tight-lipped smile, and a promise to keep her phone on, even though service in the park was laughable. Alyssa was on a solo photography trip, at least that's what she'd told her mother. 3 nights, 4 days, 1 DSLR, 2 spare batteries, and a brand new hiking journal. She had been visiting Yellowstone with her family every summer since she was 10, and by 17, she knew the northern trails better than some rangers. Confident, experienced, and quiet by nature, Alyssa wasn't one to invite trouble. That's what made her disappearance so baffling. By Monday morning, when she missed her scheduled check-in call, her mother began to panic. By Monday evening, when Alyssa still hadn't responded to text messages or social DMs, the worry escalated into something else, something colder. Tuesday, June 20th, 5:17 a.m., Park Ranger Dennis Salazar received a call from Regional Dispatch. Missing teen camper, last known location, Yellowstone Northeast Corridor, female, solo hiker, possible campfire seen from air late Sunday night, coordinates attached. Within 2 hours, Salazar had mobilized a team of 6 rangers, 2 search dogs, and an aerial drone team. They began combing the ridge near Lamar River Trail, a route Alyssa had mentioned in a recent Instagram post. What they found first wasn't Alyssa. It was her boots, wedged oddly into a cleft of stone about 2 miles from her registered campsite. Both boots had been neatly set side by side, toes facing outward, as if she'd simply stepped out of them. No signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away, just boots, still laced, faintly damp from morning dew. The tracker dog that sniffed the interior of each boot refused to move after. It sat down, trembling. On day 3, the search intensified. Volunteer groups, park staff, and regional law enforcement worked from dawn to dusk. Posters with Alyssa's face began appearing at every trailhead. Helicopters hovered above treetops, casting long shadows across the valley. But by day 7, nothing new had surfaced. The tent was never found. Her backpack, her journal, her DSLR camera, gone. No torn cloth, no trail of belongings, no wildlife tracks that could indicate a predatory attack. The area was remote, but not entirely off-grid. Campers had passed nearby during the weekend. Some remembered hearing laughter by a fire late that Saturday. One couple recalled seeing a solitary figure sitting by a tree, staring at the horizon well past dusk, but none of them could confirm it was Alyssa. An incident report dated June 25, 2019, states the following: no indication of foul play at this time. Possibility of accidental injury and wildlife encounter remains high. Search suspended due to hazardous terrain. Investigation status, inactive pending further evidence. That same week, Alyssa's stepfather filed for divorce. By August, her case had joined the silent graveyard of unsolved national park disappearances, more than 600 by some estimates, but something about this one didn't sit right. Rangers spoke about it only when off duty, with low voices over beer and firelight. The boots, one would say, they were too clean. Another would mention the river. Too high that year, swallowed things whole, even memories. There was a pattern to it, they said, a trail that didn't exist on any map, a whispering current in the Lamar that tugged downstream harder than the physics allowed. Too many stories ending the same way, without a trace, and always the Riverbank. 4 years passed, and then, in the spring thaw of 2023, during a routine geological survey near the Soda Butte drainage area, Two park workers stumbled across something buried in the silt. Just beneath the surface, snagged under a layer of sun-bleached branches and compacted mud, was a weather-worn tarp. They dug carefully. What emerged was a collapsed tent frame. Inside, the remains of a burned notebook, the zipper from a sleeping bag, and, half wrapped in a decaying fleece jacket, a still-charged lithium camera battery. The tent was buried, not washed, not caught in flood debris, folded inward, as if placed there with intent, pressed flat and sealed under inches of earth. A half-dozen red survey flags marked the site before it was cordoned off with police tape. The National Park Service halted all geological work indefinitely. No announcement was made. 3 days later, the workers who found the tent were quietly reassigned. One reportedly took leave and hasn't spoken publicly since, but someone, somewhere, sent an anonymous tip. A reporter in Bozeman received a file containing blurred images of the site, coordinates, and one chilling sentence typed across the bottom in blocky all-caps font. "She never left. You just stopped looking." The river had shifted. That was the first thing forensic hydrologist Dr. Elaine Prentice noted as she reviewed the survey charts from the area surrounding Soda Butte Creek. Comparing satellite images from 2019 and 2023, she highlighted a subtle but significant deviation in the river's course. The original trajectory would have bypassed the place where the tent was discovered, meaning, unless someone carried the tent and buried it there after the disappearance, Alyssa's shelter had never been near the water to begin with. But how do you bury a tent 4 feet deep in compacted earth without leaving a single disturbance above it? No signs of shoveling, no residual tool marks, soil compression consistent with at least 3 winters' worth of frost layers. It hadn't moved recently. Whatever happened to Alyssa Harkins, this tent had been hidden within weeks, if not days, of her vanishing, and someone had made sure no one would stumble upon it. The Park Service filed a supplemental discovery report, backdated and coded internal only. It contained one additional note: charred fragments of paper located within interior tent lining. Some legible markings suggest personal notations, likely journal. Partial entry reads, "They don't move when I speak, but I know they're listening. I only see them near the creek, not people, not shadows, just shapes." Alyssa's mother, who had since moved to Billings, Montana, was never officially informed about the tent. She found out through an unnamed former ranger who called her after midnight on a burner phone. The conversation lasted under 2 minutes. No name, no location, just 4 words before the line went dead. They buried the evidence. A second search effort, unofficial and without agency oversight, began within days. It was led by a retired backcountry ranger named Hank Everman, who had known Alyssa during previous summers. He had taught her how to start fires with wet kindling. He remembered her always asking about the places not marked on the map. She was drawn to them, he later said in an audio log leaked online. The quiet places, the places that didn't want to be found. Everman's team, which included 2 former SAR experts and a freelance investigative journalist, returned to the Lamar Valley in early May 2023. They hiked along the original trail, comparing hand-drawn ranger maps from the 1960s to modern satellite overlays. What they discovered was a discrepancy near a particular bend in the river, an anomaly noted in old logbooks but removed from digital charts. The area was once marked drainage depression, caution, unstable ground. In the new maps, it was gone entirely, overwritten. They camped overnight nearby. At 3:14 a.m., their thermal drone captured a heat signature moving against the current in the creek, upstream, without splashing or disturbing the water's surface. The footage was time-stamped, tagged, and uploaded to a private server. 48 hours later, the server was taken offline in a federal cease and desist action for unauthorized surveillance activity within protected federal land. Everman vanished 2 days later. His truck was found parked near the north entrance. keys in the ignition. Inside the glove compartment was a printed aerial photo of Soda Butte Creek with a single phrase written in black Sharpie, "It waits in the sediment." In the weeks following, scattered tips began to emerge. One claimed a maintenance worker had found a DSLR camera hidden in a crevice near the tent site. The lens was cracked, the memory card intact. Another source said 2 frames from the card showed Alyssa, seated in her tent, eyes wide, staring at the flap, as if something, or someone, was just outside. The next frames were static, and then blackness. The FBI took possession of the card, though no formal statement was ever released. When journalists requested updates, they were met with templated replies. The case remains under review. There is no new information to share at this time. But there were whispers. In the nearby town of Cook City, a park tour guide told guests that some rangers refused to patrol the northeast corridor alone after dusk. Locals began to refer to the stretch of river beyond the Lamar Bridge as the Drowned Trail. Cell reception cut out inexplicably in the area. Wildlife trackers reported fewer animal sightings, as if even the elk and wolves had learned to avoid it. What they hadn't explained, what no one had, was how the zipper of Alyssa's tent had been sealed from the inside, or why the notebook pages showed ink bleeding in patterns inconsistent with rain exposure. Some looked melted, others burned from within. What kind of flame starts in silence, leaves no ash, and closes the tent behind itself? The case was reopened quietly in July under a new classification: unexplained environmental event, human endangerment potential, elevated. The designation wasn't public, but a redacted version leaked through an environmental whistleblower site. It described the discovery of non-standard soil composition, atypical magnetic interference, and potential anomalous biological material. It didn't say what kind, but it did reference a second name, another camper who had disappeared in 1998 under similar circumstances, whose remains were never found. He too was last seen near Soda Butte Creek, and his boots were found facing the same direction. By the time the discovery of Alyssa's tent made its way to the public, much of the official narrative had already started to crumble. The quiet whispers surrounding the case were no longer confined to rangers and small-town residents. Reports began to surface about other hikers, long after Alyssa's disappearance, who had wandered into the area surrounding Soda Butte Creek, each with their own unsettling experiences. One witness, a 52-year-old woman from Wyoming, spoke to a journalist on the condition of anonymity. She had been camping near the same creek 2 months after Alyssa's vanishing. "I woke up to the sound of something moving," the woman recalled, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not an animal, but a person. I could hear their breath, slow, almost like they were waiting for something. I called out, but no one answered. When I checked in the morning, everything was untouched. No tracks, nothing." The journalist who interviewed her, now cautious and wary, refused to publish the story. He cited the growing number of similar encounters, each one coming with more pressure to remain silent. "The more I looked into it, the more I realized I wasn't the first to stumble across something strange out there," he said in a later interview. "And I wouldn't be the last." While these reports were troubling, they weren't enough to sway the official narrative. The National Park Service maintained that no foul play was suspected, and that it was simply a case of an experienced camper getting lost. However, as the rumors spread, the darker side of Yellowstone's sprawling beauty began to take root in the minds of the public. Stories of strange phenomena, disorienting weather patterns, whispers heard in the wind, animals acting erratically, began to surface. But it wasn't until park workers stumbled upon a chilling revelation that the story took an even more disturbing turn. On the morning of August 12, 2023, during a routine survey of the park's geothermal vents near the Lamar River, a team of 3 workers made an unusual discovery. Hidden deep within a thick tangle of overgrown brush, They found something that couldn't be explained away, a series of deep claw marks, fresh and visible on the bark of a nearby tree, led them to an open patch of disturbed earth. Here, amid the twisted roots, they found an odd, half-buried object, something too large to ignore. It was a camera, distorted, cracked, and partially burned. The workers, taken aback, carefully retrieved it and turned it over to their supervisor, who promptly notified the Park Service. Hours later, the forensic team was called in. The camera, though damaged beyond recognition, contained a memory card. It didn't take long for the technicians to extract the data. Inside the recovered footage were two pieces of video. The first showed a blurry figure, Alyssa, or someone resembling her, moving quickly through the underbrush, a dim light from her flashlight casting wild shadows in every direction. Her breath was erratic. She paused, turned, and for a brief second, the video cut to black. The second frame was grainy, but the outline was unmistakable, Alyssa's silhouette, but her face was wrong, distorted, as though the camera itself was warping her features. The footage was time-stamped just 3 hours before the last known signal from her phone. After that, the camera went silent. By mid-September, the controversy surrounding the case was spiraling. A second forensic report came back, identifying unusual magnetic interference in the area surrounding the creek. The interference was not typical of the park's known natural anomalies. According to experts, it could be linked to something far older than the park itself, a reference to something unlisted in any official document. The strange phenomena were labeled as a possible external influence, a term that did little to ease the growing concerns of the public. But the more disturbing aspect of this new discovery was the seemingly inexplicable footprints near the tent site, hidden deep within the forest. Forensic specialists combed over the prints in the riverbank's soil. They were not from any known animal species. They were humanoid in shape, unsettlingly large, far too large for any person to leave behind naturally. Yet, the prints were not deep enough to suggest a heavy human presence. The prints led nowhere. They simply stopped. No trail, no continuing path, as though they had been wiped clean by an unseen force. More troubling still were the environmental markers. The magnetic data, combined with the fresh claw marks on the trees and the unnatural humidity levels measured by rangers in the area, suggested that something was manipulating the environment in the vicinity of the creek. Something that resisted detection, that didn't belong. A week after the footage surfaced, the Park Service issued a public statement, but the words felt hollow. We continue to search for answers, but no clear evidence of foul play has emerged. What they didn't say was the undercurrent of unease among the staff. Parks employees who had worked in Yellowstone for decades began to speak in hushed tones about the areas they avoided, the ones where the world seemed off-kilter. There were no explanations, just unease, and of course, the silence of the river. Alyssa's disappearance was officially classified as an unsolved case, but the truth was becoming more elusive by the day. With every revelation, the theories multiplied. Some believed wildlife had taken her, others pointed to an unknown criminal, or perhaps even something darker, an environmental anomaly manipulating the very fabric of the park itself. And then, as the autumn cold began to settle over the park in late October, the final piece of the puzzle appeared. A maintenance crew found a set of markings carved into the bark of a pine tree near Soda Butte Creek. An old symbol, one not seen in Yellowstone for decades. It was a symbol resembling an ancient, forgotten culture's rune, an odd blend of shapes and curves, too deliberate to be natural, yet too worn to have been recent. And behind it, barely visible through the fading light, was the faintest outline of a figure standing motionless, watching. The symbol, carved into the weathered pine, stood like a whisper from the past, its meaning lost to time. The markings were nearly indiscernible, hidden behind layers of bark and deep shadows. But those who had seen it could not deny the feeling it evoked, something beyond ordinary, something unsettling. For the maintenance crew who stumbled upon it, the discovery wasn't just a matter of curiosity, it was the beginning of something that no one had expected, a deeper mystery. As they examined the tree, one of the workers, a park ranger named Callum Brooks, traced the symbol with his fingers. "I've seen this before," he muttered, his voice betraying a growing sense of unease. "Not here, but in old maps, from the 1800s. Brooks had spent years studying the history of Yellowstone and had come across obscure references to early settlers, those who had ventured into the park long before it became a national treasure. There were whispers in old journals, vague accounts of strange occurrences, lost settlers, and unnatural events that some believed were connected to the land itself. But these were merely stories, fables passed down through generations of families who had lived on the fringes of the wilderness. However, this discovery felt different. There was nothing mythical about it. This was something real, something tangible. Brooks's discovery was not just limited to the symbol. As the crew dug around the base of the tree, they unearthed a small cache of items: an old weathered compass, a rusted knife, and an iron key with an unfamiliar insignia. The key seemed out of place, primitive, yet intricate in design. The compass, though damaged, still pointed toward a spot in the park's interior that had no clear landmark. A site never marked on any modern map. The items were taken to the Park Service headquarters, where an investigative team was assembled. But the more they examined the artifacts, the less they understood. No records existed of a settlement or outpost in that location. No expeditions were ever reported in that area, certainly none involving people who might have used tools like these. The key was a particular puzzle. It didn't match any lock known in the area, but it did resemble tools used in late 19th century industrial construction, far too advanced for any indigenous tribe in the region. The investigation ground to a halt when, once again, the Park Service remained tight-lipped. Federal officials issued a statement declaring the items were unrelated to any current investigation, effectively closing the case once more. But rumors continued to swirl. Several rangers, now increasingly worried, shared their concerns off the record. "It's not just the symbol, it's everything around it," one of them said, voice trembling. "There's something buried out there, something old. Something that doesn't belong." Still, Alyssa's case was officially deemed unrelated to the findings, despite the chilling connection. The park was vast, and many things went unnoticed in the wilds, the authorities argued, but no one could explain the eerie coincidences. A symbol seen in early records, an ancient key, a compass pointing to a forgotten part of the park. And then, of course, the most baffling part of all, the tent, buried so carefully, hidden so completely. With the case once again left in limbo, independent investigations began. It wasn't just local journalists digging for answers anymore. Individuals from all over the country, hikers, conspiracy theorists, and amateur historians, began pouring into Yellowstone. Some camped near Soda Butte Creek, armed with GPS devices and handheld radios, attempting to trace Alyssa's movements. Others, more persistent, dove into the historical records, searching for any trace of the mysterious symbol or similar occurrences. And then, in February 2024, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a local archaeologist named Jessica Wells. She had been conducting her own research on the park's history and its shifting boundaries over the centuries. Wells had come across an obscure reference in a 1912 geological survey, buried within an appendix of unremarkable data about local rivers and mountains. The document made mention of an ancient settlement, identified only as Haven, situated near the mouth of Soda Butte Creek. The description was vague, more of a footnote really, but it noted something peculiar. The inhabitants were said to have disappeared, leaving no trace behind, save for the peculiar symbols etched on trees. These symbols matched the ones found near the pine tree. What made it even more chilling was the next line. "No records have survived, but oral tradition suggests the site was abandoned due to an unnatural presence." Wells's discovery was shared with the investigative team, but as expected, it went largely ignored. The Park Service stuck to its guns. The case was closed. As the months dragged on, the speculative theories grew wilder. Some said Alyssa had been taken by a cult. Others suggested a serial predator was responsible. But the stories about the park's haunting atmosphere, the coldness in the air, the feeling of being watched, started to bleed into every corner of Yellowstone. By the summer of 2024, even seasoned park rangers who had worked in Yellowstone for decades began to speak of strange occurrences in the very area where Alyssa had vanished. One ranger, who had been with the service for over 20 years, confided in a journalist that he had experienced a sudden, overwhelming urge to leave the area during a routine patrol. "It was like a voice in my head," he said. "It wasn't a sound, but it was clear. Leave, don't go farther. I can't explain it, but I turned back." As the anniversary of Alyssa's disappearance approached, the community around Yellowstone began to grow uneasy. Theories surrounding her vanishing, the hidden tent, the mysterious artifacts, and the eerie presence around Soda Butte Creek began to merge into something darker. Whatever happened to Alyssa, whatever forces were at work in the park, was far from over. And then, just as the public was starting to lose hope, something remarkable happened. A body was found, not far from where the tent had been discovered. But this time, it was not Alyssa. It was someone else. Someone whose face was eerily familiar. The discovery sent shockwaves through the park, shaking the foundations of everything that had been assumed about Alyssa's case. It wasn't just the proximity to her original campsite, it was the uncanny similarities that began to emerge. The body was found near the base of a large twisted oak tree, just a quarter-mile from where the tent had been buried, its body positioned in a manner eerily reminiscent of the way the missing teenager's belongings had been found. The remains, though not decomposed beyond recognition, showed signs of trauma that were difficult to explain. The victim, identified as a 21-year-old backpacker named Thomas Arland, had been missing for over 6 months. Arland had been hiking the park alone, a routine that many solo adventurers took on. His disappearance had barely made headlines, overshadowed by other, more publicized incidents. According to the coroner's report, Arland's body was remarkably well preserved for someone who had been dead for months. His clothes, though dirtied and torn, showed no signs of the typical decomposition one would expect in the harsh Yellowstone environment. His skin was unnaturally pale, as if the very life had been drained from him. The most disturbing aspect of the discovery wasn't the condition of the body, but the surrounding area. The ground around Arland's body had been methodically disturbed, just like Alyssa's tent, buried and hidden with no clear explanation. The soil around the oak tree was compacted, freshly turned, and several items had been left in a strange pattern. A rusted compass, a broken camera, and a journal with its pages scorched, as though burned from the inside out. The forensic team was baffled. The items found with Arland bore no resemblance to his own, and the circumstances surrounding the discovery were disturbingly similar to Alyssa's case. But there was more. According to the autopsy, Arland's cause of death remained undetermined. No clear signs of physical violence, no gunshot wounds, no injuries that could explain the trauma. Yet the toxicology report revealed traces of an unknown substance in his bloodstream, something never before detected in Yellowstone's wilderness. The substance didn't match any known plant or chemical compounds found in the park. As news of the discovery spread, public interest surged. Speculation ran rampant. Some suggested that the two cases were unrelated, just coincidental, but others began to draw comparisons. The pattern of disappearance, the mysterious return of the body, the bizarre similarities between the two victims, it was all too much to dismiss. The Park Service, now under immense public pressure, announced that a joint investigation with the FBI had begun. However, their public statements were vague at best. No clear explanation was given as to why it had taken so long to find Arland's body, nor why the findings seemed to mirror Alyssa's case so closely. For weeks, the investigation was conducted behind closed doors, with the only updates coming from anonymous sources and off-the-record conversations. One such conversation, recorded in secret by a local journalist, suggested that the Park Service was holding back key information about Arlen's discovery. The journalist spoke to a senior ranger who had been part of the recovery team. "There's something out there. Something old," the ranger had said, his voice barely audible. "We're just not supposed to know about it. It's not on the maps, not even in the records. They've tried to bury it, and maybe that's what's been happening to the people who go looking for it." The ranger's words were ominous, and they raised more questions than they answered. What was he referring to? And why did he believe that Arlen's and Alyssa's disappearances were connected to something older, something hidden in the park's past? As the investigation progressed, the connection between the two disappearances became more apparent. Both Alyssa and Arlen had been in the same general area of the park. Both had gone missing under strange circumstances, and both had been found under similar, unexplained conditions. The Park Service had already stated that there was no evidence of foul play, but with each new discovery, the lines between reality and something darker began to blur. Then, in late October, a break came. An anonymous tip led investigators to an old research facility deep within the park, long abandoned and hidden from public view. The building was a relic from the 1940s, a place once used by the U.S. military for secret experiments on wildlife and environmental conditions in national parks. Inside, investigators found documents that had been long thought to be lost or destroyed. One of the documents contained a chilling note. "Project Echo. Discontinue testing. The anomaly is still present. It's not the land. It's the people. They are drawn to it. They disappear." The note was a fragment, a mere hint at a larger operation that had taken place decades ago, one that had involved the very land where Alyssa and Arlen had gone missing. The idea that the park might be the site of some kind of experiment or anomalous activity linked to the disappearances of visitors was something that could no longer be ignored. As more documents were recovered, it became clear that the park had a long history of strange disappearances. Early ranger reports from the 1930s mentioned unexplained phenomena, but they were dismissed as superstition or the musings of overworked staff. But what if they weren't? What if the park had always been a place where something unnatural had lurked? Something that preyed on those who ventured too far, on those who didn't heed the warnings. In the midst of these revelations, the local community began to rally around the case. An online petition calling for the reopening of the investigation gathered thousands of signatures, and amateur investigators began pouring into the park, hoping to uncover the truth. Some believed it was the work of a long-forgotten cult. Others insisted it was the doing of strange, supernatural forces. But no one had the answers. The FBI, meanwhile, continued to stonewall any requests for information. The public outcry only grew louder as the anniversary of Alyssa's disappearance approached. Despite the mounting pressure, the Park Service refused to release any further details on the case, citing ongoing investigations. And so, the mystery lingered, like a dark cloud hanging over Yellowstone National Park, its secrets buried deep within the earth. What had happened to Alyssa and Arlen? What was hidden beneath the park's seemingly tranquil surface? And what was the truth behind the strange symbols, the hidden artifacts, and the chilling evidence that pointed to something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined? For now, the answers remained out of reach, and the only thing that remained certain was the unnerving thought that someone, or something, was still out there, watching. As the first snowflakes of December began to settle over Yellowstone, an unsettling calm fell over the investigation. The media had moved on, as they always did, to other stories, other missing persons, other mysteries. The case of Alyssa Harkins and Thomas Arlen seemed to fade into the background, overshadowed by time and the cold grip of the wilderness. But for those who had followed the trail, the unanswered questions were becoming increasingly unbearable. Then, on the night of December 5th, 2024, something happened. It wasn't a discovery, not a breakthrough, or a new piece of evidence. No, it was something simpler, and far more chilling. A seasoned park ranger, by the name of Sarah Michaels, was on her nightly patrol near Soda Butte Creek. She had walked these trails for over 10 years, had seen things that most people would never believe, and had heard the rumors about the area, the eerie stories whispered in the staff room about the strange pull the land seemed to have on people. But Sarah had always dismissed it. She was a professional, and professionals didn't give in to superstition. Not in her line of work. That night, as she walked the well-trodden path, something caught her attention. A faint glow. It wasn't the soft, natural light from the moon, nor was it the usual glow of park floodlights. This was different. A bluish, almost ethereal light that seemed to pulse with a rhythm that Sarah couldn't quite place. Curiosity and duty drove her toward the light. The closer she got, the more the air seemed to thicken. Her breath, usually clear in the cold winter air, felt heavy. The trees around her, once familiar and comforting, now seemed to loom, their branches twisting in unnatural angles. The ground beneath her boots was soft, as though the earth had become unsettled in a way that was difficult to explain. It felt as though the land itself was alive, watching, waiting. When Sarah finally reached the source of the light, her heart nearly stopped. There, on the edge of the creek, stood an old, dilapidated cabin. She had never seen it before, not in all her years in the park. It wasn't on any map, not in any records. It wasn't even supposed to exist. The cabin was covered in moss and overgrown vines, as if it had been abandoned for decades. The windows were dark, but the light, this unnatural blue light, seemed to be emanating from within. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to turn back, but something kept her rooted to the spot. A deep, almost primal curiosity pulled her closer. She stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking under her weight. Her flashlight flickered, its beam struggling against the overwhelming glow from inside. As she reached for the door, her hand hesitated, trembling slightly. Something about this place felt wrong. But she was a ranger, and she had to investigate. She had to know what was going on. The door swung open without resistance, revealing an interior that defied explanation. The walls were lined with old photographs, photos of people she didn't recognize, some of them wearing strange, ancient clothing. The faces were distorted, blurred as though the photographs had been exposed to something far beyond time. There were no signs of human life, no recent activity, but the air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic. In the center of the room, on a long, decaying table, lay a journal. It was open, the pages yellowed and frayed at the edges. The handwriting was spidery, almost frantic. Sarah stepped closer, drawn to it, her fingers itching to turn the pages. She hadn't yet touched it when she felt it, a shift in the air, a sudden, unnatural coldness that seemed to settle into her bones. Her radio crackled to life. "Ranger Michaels, are you there? Over?" The voice, though crackling with static, was unmistakable. It was her supervisor, but the tone, the urgency in his voice, sent a chill down her spine. "Michaels, this is urgent. You need to leave now. We've got reports of something moving in the park. I don't care what you're doing. You need to get out of there. Now." Without thinking, Sarah slammed the journal shut. The glow in the cabin seemed to flicker for a moment, like a dying light bulb. Then, as if something in the room had been disturbed, it went completely dark. Her flashlight blinked back to life, and with a feeling of dread clawing at her throat, she turned and bolted from the cabin. She didn't stop until she was well past the creek, her breath ragged and her heart pounding. She didn't know what she had seen, but she knew one thing for certain. Something was out there, something that was tied to the land itself, something ancient and unfathomable. When she reported the incident, the response was swift and unsettlingly calm. "We've checked the area," her supervisor told her, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "There's nothing there. No cabin, no journal, no evidence. Understand?" But Sarah knew what she had seen. She knew that the park held more secrets than anyone was willing to acknowledge. Days passed. The cabin, the journal, the strange blue light, they all seemed to vanish as quickly as they had appeared. No trace remained. It was as though the entire thing had been wiped from existence. When Sarah tried to press the issue, she was told to drop it. There was no investigation, no follow-up. She was warned to keep quiet, to forget what she had seen. But the truth, whatever it was not so easily forgotten. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that this was only one part of a much larger puzzle. The disappearances, the symbols, the strange occurrences, everything pointed to something far older than the park itself, something that had been there long before the first explorers ever set foot on its grounds. And then, just as the cold of winter began to bite into the land, another call came in. Another camper gone missing. This time, a young man named Eric Porter, a geology student. His disappearance, though still a mystery, was eerily similar to Alyssa's. The search began again, but this time there was something different in the air. A growing sense of dread that hung over the entire park. For Sarah Michaels, the questions no longer had easy answers, and the more she searched, the more she understood. There were things in Yellowstone, things that no one could explain, that didn't want to be found. And they were waiting for someone to uncover the truth. The disappearance of Eric Porter was not just another missing persons case. It was the spark that reignited the buried fears within Yellowstone National Park. Unlike the previous cases, this one felt different. The authorities had grown accustomed to the idea that people went missing in the park, but what they couldn't deny was the growing pattern, a pattern that stretched back decades, hidden beneath layers of official reports and dismissed theories. By the time the search for Eric Porter began in earnest, the local media had already latched onto the chilling similarity to Alyssa Harkins's case. The online forums, once buzzing with theories and whispers about strange occurrences in the park, exploded with new activity. Amateur investigators flooded the area once again, armed with GPS trackers, thermal cameras, and drones. The park was alive with speculation, but the Park Service was silent, refusing to issue public statements or release any details about the case. Sarah Michaels, who had been sidelined after her encounter with the cabin, couldn't stay away. She had been given clear orders to stay out of the investigation, but the whispers in her head, the ones that had haunted her since she first discovered the strange symbol, were louder than ever. She knew something was wrong, deeply wrong, and she couldn't ignore it. The search for Porter took the same route as previous efforts. Rangers combed the park in search of any trace, footprints, discarded items, anything that could lead them to the missing geologist. But once again, the wilderness seemed to swallow him whole. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence that Porter had met any foul play. Just like Alyssa, his belongings remained untouched. His tent was missing, along with his personal effects. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. But this time, there was a crucial difference. In a small twist of fate, one of the search dogs had picked up a scent, a faint trace that led rangers down a secluded path near the Lamar River. The scent grew fainter as they approached a cluster of large rocks, which seemed completely out of place. The dog, a Belgian Malinois named Rex, began to whine anxiously as they neared the rocks. Rex refused to move forward, his ears flat against his head, his body rigid with fear. The rangers had seen enough to know this was no normal behavior. When they carefully examined the rocks, they found something that made even the seasoned rangers pause. Embedded in the soil beneath the rocks was a small, rectangular object. It was a metal case, rusted but intact. It was the size of a small toolbox, but it was too strange, too out of place. The Rangers had never seen anything like it before. The case was opened with great caution. Inside, they found several documents, old and crumbling, that looked like they had been there for years. The pages were yellowed, and the ink had begun to fade, but enough of it was legible to give them pause. The documents appeared to be official reports, written in the early 1900s, detailing unusual findings within the park. There were references to unseen forces, disappearances, and unnatural occurrences that had plagued the area for decades. One of the documents was particularly disturbing. It spoke of a group of early settlers who had encountered something in the park, a presence that seemed to manipulate time and space, drawing people in and then making them disappear without a trace. The settlers had left, but not before they recorded strange symbols in their journals, symbols that matched the ones Sarah had seen near the oak tree. And, most chillingly, the document concluded with a warning: it feeds on those who seek it. The more you search, the more it will take. The discovery was immediately reported to the Park Service, but when they arrived at the site, the metal case was gone. There was no trace of it, as if it had never existed at all. Only Rex, the dog, remained, still uneasy, still refusing to approach the area. Sarah, who had been working under the radar, managed to get her hands on a copy of the documents before they were removed. She couldn't help but feel the weight of their meaning, the references to disappearances, the symbols, the cryptic warnings. It was all connected. There was something in Yellowstone, something ancient, something that didn't want to be found. In the days following the discovery, the investigation seemed to stall. The official narrative from the Park Service remained unchanged. Eric Porter had likely gotten lost, and the Rangers would continue their search. But Sarah knew better. The more she pieced together from her own research and what little she had uncovered, the more she realized that the case was far from over. One evening, as she pored over the documents in her cabin, Sarah found a disturbing entry that seemed to connect all the dots. A reference to an old legend, one that had been passed down through the generations but never truly taken seriously. The legend spoke of a creature of the land, a being that had the power to shape the wilderness, to make it bend to its will. Those who ventured too close, the legend warned, would become part of it, absorbed into the park itself, lost to the earth. The more Sarah dug, the more she began to question the very nature of Yellowstone. Was it just a park, a beautiful landscape full of wonders and dangers? Or was there something more, something far older, something that had been hidden for centuries, waiting for those who ventured too far to discover its terrible secret? As winter closed in, Sarah received an unexpected visit from a man who claimed to have answers. He introduced himself as Dr. Simon Elliott, a professor of anthropology who had been researching Native American folklore and the history of the park. He had heard rumors about Sarah's investigations and believed they were connected to something he had been studying for years. According to Dr. Elliott, the strange occurrences in Yellowstone weren't just isolated incidents. They were part of a much larger, far-reaching pattern, a pattern tied to the land itself. We're not dealing with an animal, a person, or even a spirit, Dr. Elliott explained in a hushed tone. What's in Yellowstone is much older than any of us. It's not a force we can understand, and it certainly doesn't play by our rules. What you're seeing, these disappearances, these strange occurrences, it's all part of the same thing. And it's not going to stop. It never stops. His warning hung in the air long after he left, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the more she uncovered, the deeper she was pulling herself into something from which there was no return. There were forces at play in Yellowstone, forces that had been waiting, watching, and quietly manipulating the land for centuries, forces that were hungry for those who dared to seek the truth. And with each new disappearance, the whispers of something ancient and hungry seemed to grow louder. Something had been awakened in the depths of the park, and it was calling to those who would listen. What that something was, however, remained a mystery, one that no one, not even the most seasoned investigators, was prepared to solve. By early spring 2025, the case of Eric Porter's disappearance had all but consumed the small communities surrounding Yellowstone. The park had been closed off for extensive searches, but the media coverage was starting to die down. People spoke in hushed tones about the park's strange and seemingly malevolent forces. Yet no one had dared to speak openly about what they suspected until a new, unexpected visitor arrived at the park's edge. Her name was Margaret Hall, and she wasn't just another amateur investigator or local resident hoping to uncover the truth. Margaret was a historian, someone who had spent the last 15 years researching folklore, supernatural events, and unexplained disappearances in national parks. She had been contacted by a former park ranger, one of Sarah Michaels's old colleagues, who told her about a strange pattern of disappearances stretching back over a century. Margaret had been studying the peculiar history of Yellowstone for months, and the more she uncovered, the more she felt that the park harbored a terrible, ancient secret that no one had been willing to confront. Margaret had come to Yellowstone to get answers. Her first night in the park was uneventful. Just a quiet drive along the southern loop, the park's wide, empty roads stretching out into the wilderness. But when she arrived at the western edge of the park, the area near Old Faithful, something strange happened. The air was thick with fog, and the wind had picked up, carrying with it an eerie sound, almost like voices. The low hum of an unknown language echoed in the distance, reverberating through the trees and the rocky terrain. It was as if the very land was speaking to her, calling her deeper into the park. The unsettling feeling was immediate. Margaret couldn't shake the sensation that she was being watched, that something was waiting for her to make a move. At sunrise the next day, Margaret met with Sarah Michaels in a secluded corner of a small cafe in Gardner, Montana. Sarah had become an unwitting ally, despite her initial reluctance. She had seen enough, too much perhaps, to continue to ignore the strange occurrences in the park. She had come to the conclusion that something deeper was at play, something not immediately apparent to anyone with a standard understanding of the natural world. They sat together, sipping coffee in silence, before Margaret finally spoke. "I've seen the patterns," Margaret said, setting down her cup. "This isn't just about the people disappearing, Sarah. It's about the land itself. There's something in Yellowstone, something older than us, something that has been buried beneath the surface for centuries." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She had heard it all before. The theories, the dark musings, the accusations that the park was cursed. But Margaret's words hit a different chord, one that resonated with a growing sense of dread that Sarah had felt creeping into her bones for months. She leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "You're not the first person to say that," Sarah said, her eyes scanning the empty cafe. "I've been working here too long not to notice the things that don't make sense, the way people talk about certain places in the park, the way the rangers get nervous when certain names are mentioned. But Margaret, no one will listen. They all think it's just coincidence, that we're looking for ghosts." Margaret nodded, her face grim. "This is beyond ghosts. It's something more, something that has been feeding on the land for as long as the park has existed." Together, they pored over maps and old documents, tracing the paths of known disappearances, focusing on the areas that had been consistently marked in the old reports. As they studied the maps, they began to notice something strange. There was one area of the park that was never listed on official maps, an area that had been marked only in sketchy, half-baked reports, an area near Soda Butte Creek, where both Alyssa Harkins and Thomas Arland had gone missing. It was a patch of wilderness that didn't seem to fit into the park's public narrative, a place that appeared only on outdated maps, a relic of a time before the park was officially established. Margaret and Sarah both realized that the land around Soda Butte Creek was central to the pattern. Something about this area had drawn people in, perhaps something even more ancient than the park itself. Perhaps something that had been waiting for centuries, undisturbed, until now. The two women made plans to return to the area, But as they prepared for the journey, Sarah was struck by a sudden sense of fear. There had been so many signs, so many warnings over the years, but this was different. The sense of urgency, of an invisible presence growing stronger, had never been more pronounced. As they set off toward the site near Soda Butte Creek, Sarah's thoughts were heavy with dread. The land felt oppressive, as though it was resisting their very presence. The trees were tall, ancient, their branches intertwined in a canopy that blocked out the sky. The trail ahead seemed endless, stretching on into the depths of the wilderness, drawing them further from the world they knew. The air grew thick with tension, and as they approached the clearing, Sarah could feel her pulse quicken. She wasn't sure if it was fear or something else entirely. When they finally arrived, the sight before them was both haunting and familiar. The ground was disturbed. Something had been buried there, just beneath the surface of the earth. A campfire ring, half filled with ashes, was barely visible through the underbrush. But it was the surrounding trees that caught their attention. In the bark of one tree, a symbol was carved, identical to the one Sarah had seen months earlier. It was the same symbol, the one that had been etched into the oak tree. And this time, it was accompanied by a new addition, a name, scratched hastily into the bark. Alyssa. Margaret and Sarah stood in stunned silence, the implications of the discovery sinking in. This wasn't just a random place, nor was it an accident that these names had appeared. It was clear now that this was where it all led. They had uncovered something that no one had dared to explore, a dark, ancient presence that had taken root in Yellowstone long before it became a park. The eerie glow that had surrounded them the previous night seemed to pulse in the distance, as though responding to their discovery. Margaret's heart raced. There was no turning back now. They had found the heart of the mystery. But the question remained, what would happen when the land finally decided it was time to claim them too? The air grew heavier as the wind shifted, carrying with it an unsettling stillness. For a long moment, neither Sarah nor Margaret moved, the weight of the discovery pressing down on them. The symbol etched into the tree bark, the name, the sense of ancient forces lurking just beneath the surface. It was all too much to dismiss as coincidence, and the land around them, once familiar, now felt alien, as if the earth itself were holding its breath, waiting. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. But Margaret didn't reply. She was staring at the tree, her eyes locked on the strange carving. It wasn't just the name. It was the way it had been scratched into the bark, as if done in haste, in a moment of panic. Margaret reached out and traced the symbol with her fingers. The grooves in the tree bark felt unnaturally deep, as if they had been carved long ago. She looked up at Sarah, her face pale. This is where it all started. This is where Alyssa and Thomas and all the others, whoever they were drawn in. The two women stood there for what felt like an eternity, their breaths shallow and quick. The wind whispered through the branches above them, a soft, low murmur that seemed to speak in an ancient tongue. Sarah shivered. It wasn't the cold that made her skin crawl. It was the sensation that something was watching them, waiting for them to leave, to walk away from this place. She could feel it, deep in her bones, that same presence that had followed her since the first signs of something wrong in Yellowstone. The sound of a twig snapping behind them shattered the momentary silence. Both women spun around, their hearts leaping in their chests, expecting to see another person, another hiker, another lost soul drawn into the park's dark heart. But there was nothing. Only the trees, the thick underbrush, and the oppressive quiet. Margaret exhaled, her breath a mist in the cool air. "We're not alone," she said, her voice low and tense. "But it's not human. Whatever's out there, it's something else." Sarah didn't need to ask what Margaret meant. She had felt it too. The air was thick with something else, something ancient. There was a presence in the park, buried beneath the earth, beneath the trees, and it was alive. It had been waiting, quietly biding its time, and now it was awakening, and they had come too close. "Let's go," Sarah urged, her voice strained. "Now!" But before they could turn to leave, a voice called out from the trees, "You're too late." The words were soft, almost gentle, but they froze both women in place. It wasn't the voice of someone they knew. It was a voice that seemed to come from all around them, echoing off the trees, deep and resonant, like it had been there forever. Slowly, Margaret and Sarah turned, their eyes scanning the dense forest for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. No figure, no person, nothing but the trees. The voice had come from the very air itself. "Who's there?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaky but firm. "Show yourself." The silence that followed was deafening. Then the voice returned, this time with a touch of amusement, as if it found their fear entertaining. "You don't understand," the voice said, its tone almost apologetic. "This place is not meant to be known, not meant to be found. You should have stayed away." Margaret's mind raced, her pulse quickening. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small notebook, flipping through the pages filled with old notes and theories. She had studied this. She had read about places like this, where the land itself held secrets, where people disappeared, drawn in by forces they couldn't comprehend. But none of it felt real until now. None of it had ever felt so close. The voice continued, its tone now darker, more insistent. "You are asking questions that no one should ever ask, and now you're here. The land has claimed you." The words hung in the air like an iron weight. Margaret clutched her notebook tighter, the reality of the situation settling in. She looked at Sarah, who was visibly shaken but trying to stay calm. "We have to leave," Sarah whispered. "Now." But as they turned to leave, the ground beneath them began to tremble, just faintly at first. The trees, too, seemed to shift, almost imperceptibly, but enough to make the hairs on their necks stand on end. It was as if the entire forest was alive, shifting and reacting to their presence, as though the land itself was reacting to their intrusion. The voice returned, this time closer, as if it was right behind them. "You should have stayed away." The air grew heavy with tension. Sarah could feel her breath coming faster now, her pulse racing. Whatever force was out there, it was real, it was ancient, and it was angry. Margaret's mind raced as they pushed forward, through the dense undergrowth, trying to make their way back to the trail. But the path seemed to stretch farther and farther away. No matter how much they walked, it was as though the forest was closing in around them, pushing them deeper into the wilderness. "We're not going the right way," Margaret said, panic creeping into her voice. "We should have been there by now." Sarah stopped, her eyes wide. "Look," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ahead of them, through the trees, the unmistakable outline of a figure appeared. Tall, gaunt, its form shimmering in and out of focus like a mirage. It was as though the figure was not entirely human, not entirely solid. It was shifting, changing, its outline flickering like a broken image on a screen. Before either woman could react, the figure raised its arm, pointing directly at them. The ground beneath their feet trembled again, but this time the earth seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as if the very ground was alive. And then, in a voice that resonated deep within their chests, the figure spoke again, its words carrying a chilling weight. "You have awoken it." With a sharp, instinctual movement, Sarah grabbed Margaret's arm and yanked her forward, pulling her away from the figure and back toward the trail. The forest seemed to shift around them, the trees bending and twisting in a way that defied logic, as though the land itself was resisting their departure. They ran, their breaths ragged, hearts pounding in their chests. But the deeper they went into the wilderness, the more they realized they were not running away from something. They were running towards something, a truth that had been buried for centuries, something far more powerful than either of them could have ever imagined. The truth was waiting for them, and it was not ready to let them go. The moment they broke through the trees, the sense of being chased, of something relentless following them, evaporated, but the terror lingered. The land behind them was still, unnervingly so. There was no sound, no rustling of leaves, no distant call of animals. Even the air felt different, heavy, dense, as though it was pressing down on their chests, preventing them from catching their breath. Margaret and Sarah stumbled onto the trail that led back to the main road, but they didn't stop running. They kept moving, not daring to look back at the forest that seemed to loom behind them. It felt as though they had crossed an invisible line, one that once crossed could never be undone. They could feel the weight of the forest, the hidden presence within, drawing them back. And yet, despite their desperate flight, the image of the figure stayed with them. It had been there, standing just beyond the tree line, its form shimmering like something unreal. No human figure could move that way, could flicker in and out of existence like that. It wasn't something from this world. It wasn't something they could explain. They finally reached the edge of the park, where the trail gave way to the dusty road that led to the nearest ranger station. The area was deserted, save for a lone parked car and the dim lights of the station beyond. Sarah collapsed onto a nearby bench, gasping for air, her heart racing. Margaret stood beside her, her hands trembling, her mind reeling. It felt as though they had been through something that no one would ever believe, no one would ever understand. The documents, the symbols, the strange journal entries, all of it pointed to something far older than Yellowstone itself, something buried in the land. But the Park Service, the authorities, no one seemed to want to confront it. They had already dismissed the disappearances, the strange occurrences, as nothing more than coincidence. But Margaret knew better. She had seen it with her own eyes. The land was alive, and it had been waiting. "Do you think anyone will believe us?" Margaret asked, her voice shaky. Sarah looked up at her, eyes filled with an expression of weary understanding. "I don't know," she said quietly. "But I know one thing for sure. We're not the first to be drawn in, and we won't be the last." There was a long pause between them. The silence between them felt thick, pregnant with the weight of everything they had just discovered, everything they had uncovered and tried to escape. But it was clear that the park wasn't done with them yet. The land had shown them something that couldn't be unseen. Margaret glanced over at Sarah, who was staring at the forest in the distance, her face pale and drawn. "I don't think we can just walk away from this," Margaret said softly. "I know," Sarah replied, "but we can't go back either. If we keep pushing, if we keep digging, I'm afraid of what we'll find." The stillness of the night pressed in on them, the tension between them thickening. Neither of them could truly say what they were running from, what had been waiting for them in that cabin, in the symbols, in the whispers of the land. But one thing was certain. Yellowstone was not just a national park. It was a place where something ancient, something unknowable, had made its home. And now they had uncovered it. They had uncovered its secret. Margaret turned away from the station, her eyes scanning the edge of the forest once more. A subtle shift in the air told her something was still there, still watching. No matter how far they ran, no matter how much they uncovered, the land would always be part of them. It would never let them forget. "We'll have to go back," Margaret whispered, the weight of the words sinking deep into her bones. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She simply stared at the dark stretch of forest, her face grim. Finally, she spoke, her voice resigned. "Yes," she said, "but next time, we won't be looking for answers." Margaret looked at her, her heart heavy with the unspoken truth. "What are we looking for then?" Sarah's gaze shifted, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of fear and something else: determination, survival. As they walked toward the ranger station, the sound of the wind grew louder in their ears, and the distant whispering voices of the park seemed to rise up, carried on the breeze. It wasn't just the trees that were alive in Yellowstone. The very ground beneath their feet had become something else, something older, and the park was waiting, still, waiting for the next person to wander too close, to ask the wrong questions, to uncover too much. And when that time came, the park would be ready to claim them. They had found its secret, but it had not given them the answers they sought. Instead, it had shown them a path, one that led deeper into the unknown. The silence of Yellowstone stretched out before them, endless as the night descended, and in the distance, the forest watched, its secrets buried beneath centuries of soil, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. But what truly awaited in the heart of Yellowstone remained a mystery, one that no one could escape.